Hi everyone, this is Ashley. So the story that you're going to be watching was very difficult for me to put together. It really was, it was harder than I expected to do the interview. I was getting very agitated, so I didn't really quite feel myself. And then I've been going over this story for probably about 2 weeks now, trying to edit it, and it really affected me a lot more than I thought it would. So you know, it's not to say that like I haven't healed from it, but it was, you know, it was kind of re-traumatizing to go back and like really think about all the things that had happened in my past. And so yeah, and I right now I'm just going through a lot of different emotional things, and this just kind of brought more things to light. And it was so it was a very interesting journey. But so I'm sorry for the moments in the interview where my mother and I are like talking over each other. It's just it was like the first time that we had really discussed any of this stuff for many years. And to be honest, my mom hadn't even really been coherent for a lot of the time that we would talk about things, which you'll understand a little bit in the story. And at the end of this, I really did break down and cry, and I left it in because I felt like it was just very raw and real. And so I hope you guys can, I'm going to be putting out 3 parts to this. It'll be 30 minutes a piece, basically. I hope that you can watch the whole thing, and if you need to skim through, that's fine. But I just decided that it was probably over 2 hours of footage that I finally went through and sifted through. So I tried to just leave in the most important parts, but it's hard when you're trying to tell like kind of a major life story. It's just hard to shrink it down. So I apologize that it's kind of long, and I appreciate it if you take the time to watch the whole thing. And if you're going through an abuse situation, like if you've been religiously abused, or if you've had, you know, just narcissistic abuse, or if you've been, you know, been abused as a child, or you're in an abusive relationship, I just really encourage you to be strong and be courageous and do the right thing and remove yourself from that person or those people, because at the end of the day, that laying your life down is not about getting run over, and it's not good for the person who's abusing you, and it's not good for you. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope that you glean something from our story. Hi guys, this is Ashley. This is my mom, Rhonda. This is probably our 4th attempt at putting this video together. If you
laugh or cry, what do you want to do?
If you know anything about spiritual warfare, then you will know that sometimes it is very difficult to do the tasks that God has asked you to do.
Letting you know that this is
it's been tough to get this out.
Yeah.
So
and we're just trying to obey the Lord and figure out what He even wants us to say.
Yeah. So
here we go.
Yep. When I speak about my father, I'm not speaking from a place of hatred or anger.
And that is the one thing that Jesus said, if you don't forgive, you will not be forgiven and be in heaven. So it isn't worth it.
No. And we can all end up being the villain in our own story if we're not careful. And I think a lot of times what happens with abuse is that people suffer they suffer abuse, and then they turn around and abuse others because it's too painful for them to admit that they could be abusive, and like you end up repeating these patterns.
And we all can be abusive.
And we all are abusive.
That's why,
like, you know,
Jesus had to come and die. Yeah.
And the only chance that you have at not being abusive is to go, whoa, I think I can be abusive, and like and really work on yourself. And the more you work on yourself, honestly, like you have so much work to do on yourself that you stop picking on other people, because
It's
you
about
have
mercy.
a lot of stuff
Mercy.
that you have to work on. But
I need it.
when people choose to do things that are wrong, they do have consequences, whether that's loss of relationship, whether that's like a natural, you know, if you jump off of a cliff and you break your leg, like that's just a natural consequence, right? So there's natural consequences, and when someone is being abusive to you, it's wrong of you to put up with it because it's bad for them, because you're saying to them by staying there that their behavior is correct and okay.
There's so much abuse in the church because they use scriptures, particularly towards women, to abuse, take advantage, almost slavery.
Yeah, and this can apply also to men, and this can also apply to children too. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that it can be used in any context, and there's a lot of abuse outside of the church, but I think particularly in religious settings, which is why people don't like religion, and I'm not for religion, I am for having a personal connection with your creator, you know what I mean? So that's a very different thing.
But for my children, I don't think I would be alive, because each and every one of them has helped me in their own way to get away from an abusive man that all I wanted was, because I had so much destruction as a child, was to make it work.
Yeah. So I just want to frame my father's kind of mind first, and then we'll go ahead and get into this, because I do think that's important for people to understand, because I understand why people behave the way that they do, but it doesn't make it where you should have a ton of sympathy for them. So my father was someone who he had a lot of darkness in him when he was younger, and he didn't get that dealt with. And I'm not going to say it out loud, because that's for him to deal with. But he had a darkness in him. We all have a darkness in us that if we give into that, it isn't correct, and it isn't right, and it isn't healthy. And yes, every human being has that dark side, but it's not normal. It's not good to embrace it. And our world today is so about everybody embracing themselves, and all this false self-love that tells you that any thought that pops into your head is like normal or good. And that's just not true. You can have desires that are wrong, and so he had a lot of darkness that he did not choose to deal with, and felt a lot of shame for it. And instead of getting healing for it, he overcompensated by trying to do a lot of outward good things, which I think a lot of people do. But then when people try to find out who you really are, because you have shame and kind of hatred for that dark side, but don't deal with it, you don't bring it into the light, you don't start dealing with the infection, you start hating those who bring those things out to the light. So my dad basically thought, he kind of wasn't normal. There's a lot of mental illness on that side of the family, and I've shared my story with you guys, so you guys know that, like, I'm an open book, and I'm all about healing mental illness. But like I said,
Ashley's standing because she can't sit, and I'm sitting because I can't stand.
we're just like we're all,
not
we're
for very
patched
long
together. So
anyway, that's why we're
so it's very so I'm all about healing, and I really do believe that anybody can be healed, and I think anybody can find forgiveness. I think that sometimes people have done things that they have natural consequences that make it harder for them to come back into society, but that doesn't mean that they can't be loved by God and be loved by other people as well. So there is hope for everyone, no matter how dark you've gone. You know what I mean? Satan just loves to lie to people and get them to cover it up, and then they just feel trapped in darkness all the time. But so he wanted to feel normal, and I think that by marrying someone whom he admired a lot, he felt like that would give him a sense of normalcy and would bring some joy to his life. And then he also wanted to have children, so he felt religiously obligated to have the children. He came from a large family. A lot of people feel that. They feel that, like they must have a large family in order to please God, which simply isn't true. It's actually better to have the correct amount of children that you can properly take care of. Otherwise, it is abuse. And he was very neglected and ignored as a child, and so if you think that is normal, then you'll repeat the pattern with the next children. So that's what he did with us. The only reason why we had any emotional support was because of my mother. She was very emotionally in tune because of the trauma that she had in her past. She was determined not to repeat those patterns. So and when
which is do a little.
Yeah, and so he received a lot of love from us, because our like, I remember he would come home from work, and he kind of needed his ego fed all the time, and so it was always like, Dad's coming home from work, like everybody run downstairs and like give him kisses and hugs and all that stuff. So
we would actually clap and cheer when he came home from work.
Because he didn't get his own wounds dealt with. He had no life force within himself. So he needed so much, and I ache for him, because that void can be filled by God, but he didn't want God's healing. He wanted the soft, soothing side of God, which you only get after the infection has been pulled out. But if you try to put that soft, that's like trying to put a Band-Aid on top of a really big gaping wound, and all that's going to do after a while is make the infection worse. So you have to dig things out, and you have to get rid of that. but he couldn't do it. He couldn't face the embarrassment. And your embarrassment is so small compared to the joy that comes after the embarrassment. You know, we all have things that are embarrassing, but in all honesty, like, there isn't anything that you could have thought of or done that hasn't been done by another human being before. Like, it doesn't matter
and
how
he opposes
bad it
the
is.
proud, and he gives grace to the humble,
Yeah.
and we can all be proud moment by moment, day by day, second by second.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why he works all things together for
Mm-hmm.
good. So even me, I was a very capable person, and to just be,
Mm-hmm.
you know, devastated in every area of my life,
Yeah.
he works it for good.
Yeah. And so my dad's embarrassment and his pride kept him from dealing with things, which is what led to all this that we're going to be talking about. But my dad was depressed before he met you, then he met you, and he was on a high, and then they got married.
Mhm.
So that's just something to watch out for. When did you meet my father?
What year? 1990?
Just, yeah, and how old were you?
24.
And what drew you to him?
I think I had empathy for him, and I felt bad for him. He didn't seem like he was very connected at the church, and I knew everybody, and I was very connected, and he was never really around. And you know me, I always want people to be in a group. But he got too much into like the dating thing, and I was just wanting to be friends.
Mm-hmm. And so the first time that you met him, he basically invited himself over to your house. Is that what happened?
Yeah, and the Bible study leader, they brought over dinner.
And this was without her really like knowing that they were even coming over. They just invited themselves over. So that was already stepping over boundaries. So he was crossing boundaries and not being respectful.
He didn't even go away. Like, I shut the door on him, and then he went around, and I lived down on the Columbia River. I rented a room below this house, and it was gorgeous, but they were all French doors and glass, so I couldn't even hide from him. That I felt was very manipulative. I did not want to be more than friends.
Yeah.
But that was very difficult.
For
in
him.
a church setting, I think for a lot of guys, you're a single gal in a big church, and they're looking for somebody, you know? And I wasn't really looking for a relationship. I mean, obviously I was lonely and I wanted to be with somebody, but he manipulated me by saying that he was going to help me get a job when it was really a date. He manipulated me when I said I just wanted to be friends. And he just really wouldn't take no for an answer. And I think I got to the point where and then I didn't want to be physical. I didn't want to kiss at all. I felt, and he just laughed about that and didn't think that was anything. And so, but I was such a new believer, and I didn't understand the Bible that we were all the same in the Lord.
Yeah.
There's not levels of
Nor
of
is there really
Christianity.
male or female. The Lord says that, you
Right.
know? So
But so I think that he just never really listened to me, and I felt a lot of compassion for him because he had been bullied, and so I think I went into empathy and got that confused with actually caring for him.
Yeah.
And then thinking, well, this is the best guy that I can get. And plus I thought he was just so great. I thought he was virginal and so pure, and that I knew my sin, but he never really talked about anything that he did. So I thought, wow, I mean, he's getting a bum deal. I'm like this, you know, I had all these problems. Plus I prayed, and I wanted, because I was so athletic and so tough, the boxing and the rugby and all the sports, and being such a tomboy, that I wanted somebody that was taller than me. And they were really into asking for what you really want from the Lord. That, you know, you could bring him to the front door and all of these things. And so, you know, Satan is crafty, you know, and I got deceived, and I had too much pride to admit it. It took how many years? 30 years for me to admit that I was deceived and I made a mistake.
I'd actually like to interject too, though. On top of it, you started having second thoughts about your relationship with him because your thought was, we're both too perfectionistic. So you brought him to a lot of these church members, both in your church and outside of your church, that you trusted, and yet they didn't know him, but by his appearance they said, oh, Rhonda, just have faith in God and you should marry him. Because you said, I don't think we should get married.
I felt like they
and
ganged
he
up on
said,
me.
you don't have enough faith. And then every single person that you went to said, you don't have enough faith. So not only was this abuse from Mike, but it was abuse from a bunch of church people that should have protected you from a guy they really didn't know.
And it's still going on today. You know, the church abuse. So, so I had empathy for him, and when I had empathy for him, I think because he never really had anyone really care for him, even his own parents, he just latched onto that. But I was just a very empath, that got super duped.
But basically he manipulated you into having the relationship, which a lot of guys do.
I said I just want to be friends, and he was like just convinced that I really wanted to be with him, but I just was so scared or whatever. And it was like, no, I think a girl knows when she doesn't want to be with a guy.
Yeah.
But I got manipulated, and then we were physical, and that forms more of a bond, and it made it harder for me to, and 5 different times he would ask me to marry him, and I would say, please don't ask me. And even had his mom call me. So just a lot of manipulation. And then the way that he asked me to marry him was he came in and he shook me violently and said, don't you understand what I'm trying to do? And I was just like, basically the way that you've seen him be abusive to me, grabbing my arms, are you having enough, that kind of stuff. But I couldn't see it. And that's really what I want to say to people, is that if that can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. Because you're such a strong woman.
Yeah.
You think, oh, that could never happen to me.
Exactly. And narcissists know how to charm. And that has been the struggle with my father going to all these different places. He knows exactly what to say. He knows exactly how to get people on his side. People always say, well, how could you fall for someone who's abusive?
But I
he
think it happens probably 98% of the time.
Yeah.
And Ashley is great at the psychology stuff. I'm just going to say what the Bible says. There's wolves.
Yeah.
And I married a wolf. And that really about sums it up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got duped, and I didn't realize that he was depressed, and I was a very, I would say, just naturally optimistic energy, high energy person. And, he wanted to make sure that he was very heavy discipleship, very like how Jerry is at Park Ridge, just very heavy, you have to do this, like just controlling people.
It's all about power and control.
And so,
that's not God. That is not what God stands for at all.
And so he gave me this book, Disciplines of a Beautiful Woman. He thought he found a beautiful woman who was vibrant, who could have the children he wanted, maybe make him look good. We could be lay leaders in the church or whatever his dreams were. And then he gave me this book about Disciplines of the Beautiful Woman, which it was basically how to put the man first in every area, even down to his sock drawers, everything. And I was like a slave. I was like a white sex slave, a house slave, and I never even had a bank card in my name. He never gave me a budget. If I did go out and spend money, I was berated for what I spent, and it was really just laundry, soap, stuff for the house, and stuff for the kids. But I didn't see it because I was so busy just raising the kids, and doing what I was supposed to do. But yes, he was very depressed. I noticed that he didn't have any joy, and I always kind of wondered if throughout, because I wasn't a very mature Christian, I didn't really know the Bible. And so everything was, and that's another thing that I really resent, is all of his religious, overly rapture, overly religious.
He's a fear-based person, and he's superstitious because of what he was raised with, and so he has no true connection with God that is in trust, love, and faith. It is all based in fear and superstition and shame. So it creates a lot of friction, and basically he was very emotionally, I would say you were not a teen.
No.
It was
No.
he was superior, but he
Yes.
was also very emotionally withdrawn, and so she would work and work and work and work and work, and then he would, if she got tired or whatever, he'd say, oh, his burden is easy, his yoke is light.
Oh, and about homeschooling,
Yeah.
having kids back to back.
Yeah.
I had all these health problems.
And you
And
just didn't
undiagnosed
ignored
celiac. I was almost died when I was an infant. Always had stomach problems, and he knew about all this. And but yeah, it would just always be, again, using the scriptures
Yeah.
to manipulate and to control. So I had suspected after a while that maybe he wasn't really. I would feel bad about it. Like, well, is he even a believer? Because you hear about these pastors like in these precept conferences or whatever. And the one guy was really honest, and he said, I literally came to Christ through my own preaching once in church, and I was like, because you feel bad about thinking that maybe somebody doesn't really know God or whatever. But it was because he didn't have joy. And then I thought, well, I have all this time to study the Bible, and maybe, which is partly true. But I mean, I knew the scriptures better than him, and then that became a rub. And then, you're not supposed to constantly be teaching your husband, so I didn't share stuff with him. But I mean, I studied the Old Testament, and I mean, I really memorized scriptures for myself.
Yeah.
So it kind of just became obvious. And then what really bothered me was how he would undermine with the way that I was training you guys. I have a
He
leash.
thought that he kind of laughed a lot at what my mom did because he thought that she was too strict, but he also really appreciated
It was
how
pretty overbearing.
we were very, very disciplined, probably a little bit too much, but she had to
Absolutely.
be hyper that way because my dad was so lax, and he just kind of laughed off whatever my mom did.
Like
because he
teaching
thought
the
it
kids
was-
to do chores,
because he
teaching
was
them to
so
pick up
neglected.
after themselves.
Yeah.
And I admit, type A neurotic, I love a clean house,
Yeah.
but I don't know what good
As
woman
one of
doesn't.
the children that was undisciplined by my own dad, because by the time I was born, Mama was too sick to take care of me. But I can say that my brother and I basically got away with murder. We could do anything we wanted, and our older sisters had to take care of everything.
In churches more where men competed about how great they could be with their wives. Let's just put it that way. So that way of competition, or being, you know, how good your wife is, or how beautiful your wife is, or how well trained your kids are, it was feeding off of
In
that
other
system.
words, the only reason why he ever was nice to you is because
It benefited him.
It made him look good.
Yes, it made him look good. And I
if he didn't
began
have
to
to treat
realize.
you well anymore, and people didn't think bad of him, then
Right,
he was going to do it.
exactly. So I began to understand that it was a little bit about his image, but not because I was worried about how he was treating me. I was actually sad for him because I'm thinking, man, if you don't own stuff, you're never going to get forgiveness. And I had a lot of stuff that I had owned.
But he was so selfish and so about protecting himself.
That I got manipulated and duped into marrying somebody that I shouldn't have, because I knew in my inner, I'm a pretty discerning person. I knew that I shouldn't have, but because I was such a new Christian,
You thought it was God's will. And,
exactly.
Everybody around you was saying it's God's will, and I get that.
and
So.
also that I was just so blessed to be with such a godly man, and I was just such a low life. So that put me in okay, and maybe I don't have a lot of those feelings, but he's a good guy. I mean, I'm not going to get any better than this, so I got to go with what I got, obviously.
Yeah.
So pretty much after that first year, he really was withdrawn. But you know, I mean, I'm a very independent person. I mean, I definitely should have married somebody that was more independent, because not being so dependent upon everything that I could give or whatever. But definitely.
Because he thought that marrying you would fix him.
Yeah.
It would fix his joy problem.
So I got manipulated. I even asked for help from the CVs because we were being too physical, and I was like, you know, this is a problem. And so we tried to have more accountability. We were going to get married in the spring, and then he rushed it even earlier. And I'm just like, didn't have anyone protecting me. And so I didn't really, nothing was my choice. Nothing was the ring wasn't my choice. How many kids we were going to have, or the education of them, everything was, I got my orders from him, and then I just did it. And when I had you guys, he never asked me, like, do you want to have another child? It was like, we had to have a baby, we had to get pregnant right away, then we had to get pregnant right away again. So my body was really starting to have a hard time, because I didn't know that I had undiagnosed celiac. I just kept pushing through, and I overtrained because I was a very athletic person, so I didn't realize that was making me sicker.
Should work out a lot.
I did a lot of bread making. I was really into that, so I was just, you know, having a lot of problems, and began to be sick in Snohomish when we lived in Snohomish. So we lived in Mukilteo, and then we moved to Snohomish, and I even went to the doctor, and I got diagnosed with a positive ANA, which means that you have some kind of autoimmune thing, but then we moved. So then I'm there, and I'm coughing all the time, and I'm having, you know, these problems, and then I get pregnant again, because of course he's wanting me to kick out these babies, never asking me, how many would you like? Would you, you know, and I thought 4 was fine because that's what I came from, but it was never from a desire to have them, having a bunch of kids. It was a religious, you know what I mean?
like
Where
that's
it's
what I
like,
was
this
saying.
is what
So,
you do to be right before God.
Yeah.